everybody hear me somewhat well enough? Oh, we'll get the do you want to get the music? All right. Well, first of all, let me apologize to all the Lions fans. I should have checked the schedule to see. That's what I was trying to do. There we go. I should have checked the schedule to see what time they were playing today. So no, I will not hold it against you if you are checking your phone at times to see what the score is. I might be doing the same. But as of halftime, I saw it was 20-10 in our favor, so we're doing okay. I know. I do have to say, just the little dig that'll make, because most of you by now know, like, I'm an Oklahoma boy, and I know it was bad yesterday. But I'm just saying, the last time this season that the Lions played against a former Oklahoma quarterback, it didn't go very well. They're playing another one today. I was concerned, but so far so good. But it's still kind of a win-win for me. The second thing I will say, just as we get started, I don't know, I'm sure for a lot of you, you've been to many congregational meetings. And so often, even in my experience, I think they're well-intentioned, but a lot of times they just have a tendency, as we start giving a chance for questions and answers and all that kind of stuff, there's, for whatever reason, I think partially because I think people just care so much, there can be a tendency for whatever reasons for tensions to start to boil. So first of all, let me say tonight, I think this is a meeting with everything we have to talk about. This is good stuff. This is exciting stuff. The second thing I'll say is the last meeting that we had went very, very well. So Banner Church, you're helping heal me of my PTSD with congregational meetings. Because, I've had some bad experiences. So what I will ask tonight, though, is even if you have questions, and there's going to be time for that, and I'm going to do my best to answer. We have many of the elders here as well if we need help with that. But if you have questions, please ask them. What I will ask is just maybe be mindful of how you're going about asking those questions. Let's make sure that as a congregation, as we walk through some of these things, which again, this should be an easy one to do this, but as we walk and talk through some of these things, let's make sure that our goal is to stay unified, is to stay together, is to build each other up, and to help seek clarification so we can move forward together in a positive direction. Does that make sense? Is that fair? All right. But like I said, I think this should be a really easy meeting to do that, because as we look at what we have to talk about tonight, I'm really excited about what we have to say. So, as I've been saying over the last few weeks, the few things that we're going to hit on tonight, we're going to first do a little health check-in dealing with just attendance, finances, some of those things. We're then going to move on to talking a little bit about staffing and where we're at in that process. And then we're going to end our time talking about family ministry. So let's start with the fun stuff, which is our health check-in. And looking at that, the first thing that I want to hit on tonight is looking at our attendance over the last couple years. So as I look at attendance, there's a few different ways to look at this. As we measure it here at Banner Church, the metrics that we look at, we have our in-person attendance, which is those that are in the room, in service, on campus on Sunday mornings. And then there's also the online views, which the crazy thing is, over the last 3 or 4 years since we've had our live stream, we've been remarkably consistent at about 38 views a week. So that has held. It's maybe bumped up 1 or 2 over the last couple years, but that's been holding pretty close to about that 38 mark. For me, the number that I really like to look at is in person. And I'm not one of those pastors that gets too caught up in attendance, that gets caught up in butts and seats. Because to me, even if you try to make the nice justification of, well, every number is a soul, yes, that's true. But even more so, if we view ourselves as a congregation, while we do hope to see growth, and growth can be a sign of health, the more important thing is that we view ourselves, for me as a pastor, that I'm not just looking to get more people to come and listen to me, but I'm looking to shepherd the congregation that God has entrusted to me. So while I care about numbers, they can be a good indicator of whether or not things are healthy. For me, the more important thing is, are we growing together well? Are we following God's will well as a church? But let's look at the in-person number, because again, to me, I think that's the one that is maybe a better indicator. So on the next slide that you will see here, in 2022, and the numbers for this one are kind of hard to keep track of, because before I got here in September, the only number we have is the lump sum together of the in-person and online views. So what I did is, taking the average of about 38 online views per week, I just deducted that from the total number we had for 22, which gets us somewhere around 92 people a week. As we go to 2023, at that point, we had very clear numbers of what our in-person attendance was. For 2023, we were averaging out at 121.5 people per week here at Banner Church, which is up about 29.5, which again, that one, because the 2022 number is a little bit of an estimate, I don't get too excited about. If you look at 2024, as of right now, we are averaging on Sunday mornings 138.9, so just shy of 0.4. I think somebody's been keeping their toe sticking out of the door on Sunday morning or something, because that gets to our 140. And as I look at that number, the exciting thing is if you look at sort of church attendance trends, normally what happens is the spring coming off of Christmas, you might have 1 or 2 down weeks in January, but for the most part, the spring starts high, slowly trickles down. You hit your summer slump where it drops a little bit, sometimes by 10, 20, 30%. I've been in some churches where it drops by about 50%. And then you hit the fall and it starts peaking back up. So what we're looking at for 2024 is we have kind of our high spring where numbers were looking really good. And then we have our summer slump. We have not yet hit our fall climb. So even without having those numbers to bump our average like 2023 had, we're still averaging 17.4 people more than we were last year. So we're seeing pretty steady growth, which is exciting. And even over the summer, if you look at our averages so far, we're pretty consistently, the gap year over year, so if you look July versus July, August versus August, that gap is steadily climbing from, again, for the year it's at 17.4, but over the last few months it's been closer to 20 to 21. So we're seeing that there's some growth that is taking place. We're seeing some new families come in. We're seeing some old families that are re-engaging. So overall, the trend in in-person attendance is steadily climbing, which is exciting to see. So with that as well, then, the more important metric that I like to look at is this next slide here. These are what I call the markers or health indicators. If you look at this for this year, so far we've had 1 baptism, which was Miles Hansel over the summer over in the Van Ingens pool, which was awesome to be a part of. We've had 1 child dedication, and I have a feeling we've got a few more of those on the way. But then we've also had 3 new members, and we have 3 more that have gone through the process that I just need to get up here and kind of schedule a Sunday to get them officially brought in. And then plus another 6 that are in the process that have the paperwork that I just have to get their paperwork back and then get the process rolling. So we have a number of a number of people that are looking to become members here at Banner Church, which is exciting. I know at one point we were at, I think it was about 15 or so that were in process. So there's a good chunk that are coming in that are expressing interest and joining our congregation. Moving on to the next part of looking at our health check-in, and this is the part that some of you are probably a little more interested in, which is our finances. As you came in tonight, on the table in the back, there was a printout there that gives kind of a high-level look at our fiscal year, which is 2023 to 2024. So just in case you're not aware, at Banner Church, the way we operate, the way our fiscal calendar goes, it begins on September 1 and ends on October. That'd be a short year. It ends on August 31. So September 1 through August 31. So we just completed our fiscal year. We've got some of that stuff rolling in. But the first piece I want to hit, and this I'm really excited about, as of this month, we officially have a finance team that is back up and running. For the last 3-4 years, Tim Clay has single-handedly been just keeping the ball rolling. And man, we owe that guy a massive debt of gratitude. Because for one man to single-handedly try to oversee all the finances, keep the bills getting paid, give us some idea of budget of where we're at, like that's a ton of work. And Tim did it just very gracefully, very quietly. He didn't put up a stink. I think a lot of people with all the workload that he was carrying by himself would have just dropped it and walked away. But he carried it through. As we got to about last fall, we started having conversations knowing we needed to rebuild a finance team. And so we talked with Don Vanderlaan, who helped us kind of serve as an architect a little bit. He started working with Tim Clay. And then we started having conversations, which ultimately led to Tom Vogt, Tricia Schildhouse, and Roger Cooley stepping in to form our new finance team. So over the last few months, to have a smooth transition, we had them connect with Tim, get the information they needed, but had Tim kind of keep trudging along as the new finance team started rebuilding the systems in the background, getting the data they needed. And then finally, as of this month of September, the new finance team has taken over and Tim Clay is able to step back and breathe again, which is awesome. So I'm excited to get that up and rolling. The positives for us as a church in that, and once again having a finance team, is we actually, instead of having one person, we have a group of people working together. So when we have questions about finance, we can actually ask and get information. We can make better decisions, better informed decisions. For us as a church, I mean, I've talked about this before, but one of my goals as a pastor and the elders share of the school is we want to be as financially transparent as we can be, which is part of why we have that document back there for you tonight. And as we get the next budget finalized, we can make that available to you upon request. But we just want to make sure, because the church is based on your donations, because the church is based on people giving to the church as God has blessed them, we want to make sure that we are as open with any information that we can get to you. Having a finance team makes it a lot easier, because now if we have questions, we can actually get that data a lot quicker. So with that, thanks to Tim, thank you to Roger, Tricia, and Tom. But then the big question you probably have is, okay, but how are we doing financially? This is what I'm excited about. As we were getting ready and kind of beginning this last fiscal year, the initial look ahead, we knew we were making a swing, but with hiring a pastor, we knew that there was a chance that our finances could take a little dip and might take time to recover, because anytime you add in a senior pastor's salary, it adjusts your budget. That's a big chunk when it comes to personnel. And so we were expecting to see a little bit of a hit, and even the projections at the beginning of this last fiscal year, I don't want to say a number because I don't remember the exact number, but we were projecting to still be kind of in the hole this year. As of finalizing with the new finance team the last fiscal year, here's how it breaks down. For the average weekly giving, we came in at about $6,403 a week. The financial outcome, or whatever the right term for that is, this is pastor's terminology for finance, we ended up positive just shy of $20,000 this year. So we were projected at the beginning of the year to be in the red, to be kind of going, not under, but to be operating at a loss. You guys were incredibly generous in your giving. God was incredibly faithful. We came in, again, just shy of $20,000, which is just incredible. Like whenever I first started hearing rumors that might be the case, I was optimistic, but still like waiting. Like, okay, but what are we going to find? Where's that bill that we didn't pay that's going to take us into the red? But after everything has been crunched, that's where we're at. So in the bank right now, we have, well, as of August, $194,829.48. And that's after spending the $16,000 to redo the parking lot this year. That's after some of those other expenses. We're doing good. And just to give sort of a comparison, last year at this time, if you look back at the August bank statement of 2023, we were sitting at $173,975.49. So with everything we've gone through this last fiscal year, redoing the parking lot, all those other expenses, updating the stage and different things, we still have $194,829 in the bank. Finished $20,000 in the red, or in the black. Got to get that right. God's been good. God has been so good to us, which enables us to actually look at the future optimistically. It allows us to stop asking, okay, how do we stop the ship from sinking? And instead start saying, okay, now how do we get to where God is calling us? How do we move ahead in a healthy direction? As a pastor, I got to say, it's incredibly exciting to not have to be worrying about plugging holes, but instead to actually start looking towards the future. And as we've been doing all year of praying, okay, God, would you reveal your will to us as a church? And then as he does, may we boldly listen and obey. It's exciting to be able to look at the future and to be able to try to actually be praying and following where God is leading us instead of just trying to stay afloat. So I'm going to pause right now. I know that was a lot of information. You've got the budget there in your hands. So right now I want to take just a second. Any questions, any comments? This is the first time I'll open it up. So if you have a question or a comment, I'll just ask, raise your hand. I'll call on you just to keep it somewhat orderly here. And we have the finance team here with us and a number of the elders, so we'll do our best to answer questions. So any questions? Also, does anybody have the Lions score? Yes, Kim.
Okay, so I see the income for the American Heritage Girls.
Mm-hmm.
Is there the expense for them just lumped in all these categories, like it's not a separate line item, or am I missing something?
Where's Tom at on that one?
It's grouped as the summary line under outreach expenses.
Okay, so outreach expenses would be the...
Both of those were either even or just above on the income versus expenses.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Both of those ministries they've kind of turned the corner, and they're operating at a very, very financially stable level right now. Yep. Any other questions on finances, attendance, church health? You guys are making this way too easy. Everybody's in a rush to get home and watch the end of the game, aren't they? All right. Yes, Joseph. I don't know that we have any specific ministries that were really operating at a major deficit. One of the things that I do love about this church, if you look at the missions giving, we've been pretty steady at somewhere around that $23,000, $24,000 mark that we give towards missions. But because of the generous giving, because of the mission sale and all the hours donated to that, we're actually able to still continue that chunk of giving without operating at a loss on that, which is awesome. And even over the last 2 years or so, I mean, with us as a staff in the office, one of the ways that we've tried to operate, especially as we were trying to rebuild the finance team and figure out where we're at financially, the word that I like to use is scrappy. I try to encourage our team of, hey, if there's something you absolutely have to buy, then yes, that's okay, like buy it. But trying to think through, if you're going to make a purchase, is this something that we can use multiple times and not just once? Is this something that we can say, I mean, even looking at some of the lighting upgrades that we've done over the last little bit, we were able to find a deal where we could have spent, I think it would have been a little over $2,000 to get the lights that we wanted, and we were able to do that for $500. So finding ways to get what we want and get to be where we want to be, but doing so, maybe it takes a little more work, but being scrappy about it. So most of our ministries have been able to operate very financially sound. Any other questions? Last chance before we move on to staffing. All right, let's keep rolling. So moving on to staffing. This is an area that, probably most people in the church are aware of. The first thing I want to highlight is just some of the needs that we knew coming into this, really coming into the summer, we needed to address. So first of all, we knew with Kara stepping down after 25 years of being involved, like that was big shoes to fill. There was a big hole there. And especially as you look, we were doing the math the other day, I believe for Alicia and I, once our 2 babies come, and then Bree and Josiah, we get the next one in February. Is that the right month? Yeah. That's going to be 15 babies born in this church since Alicia and I got here 2 years ago, which is crazy. Yeah. Which is also exciting to see. But with that, plus all the families that we already have, like we knew, okay, it's time to address this. We need to do something with our family ministry. Also, for anybody that has teens, we're getting to a point we've been watching since I've been here. Initially, we had kind of a handful of students in that age range, but it's like, all right, like we'll address it when we can. Now we're starting to get to the point where some of those older elementary schools are starting to bump up into middle school. And as of this year, I believe the number is also about 14 or 15 students that we have that are in some way, shape, or form engaged with the church that are in that 6th grade to 12th grade range. So we know it's time, like we've got to figure out something with our youth ministry. It's time to get that rolling. And then also with Kennedy stepping down at the end of August, that leaves a big hole. Anytime you have a staff of our size and you lose somebody working 32 hours a week, like you're going to feel that. So far, we've been able to operate pretty smoothly. I've had to pick up a little bit more. But as we move into October and some of the other months, we have some other reinforcements stepping in. And it was awesome to have Jazzy, a former student of mine, here this morning to help lighten that load as well. So we're getting creative in that. But as we look at it, these are 3 areas that we know for sure. Like we've got to figure something out. In our family ministry, youth ministry, worship ministry, we know that these are areas that we have to address in some way, shape, or form, whether it be hiring, whether it be finding volunteers to step into that. We know it's time. The first step that we've taken, which we announced a couple weeks ago, is we have officially hired Ashley Giovannucci to step into our family ministry role. She will be starting early in 2025 because we wanted to give her some time to settle in with a new little one. A lot of life change going on there as well. So that gives us some time. In the meantime, Stacy Rodriguez has stepped into that role as a volunteer to keep things moving. And thanks to her and thanks to the incredible team of volunteers that Kara helped put together over the years, that ministry is still going along and they're doing great. They'll get us to early 2025. Ashley will step into that role, and then we'll start making some adjustments there. So Ashley will be stepping on as a part-time role, doing 20 hours a week. And I'm going to come back in a little bit to why we felt the need to make a hire in our family ministry, because that is a role that for so long probably should have been a paid role. But for so long, Kara was just willing to do it, and was just, I mean, we owe Kara, as we even said on your last Sunday, but we'll say time and time and time and time again, this church owes you a lot for the way that you kind of kept that ministry going. But we felt the need to address that. I'm going to come back to that. The other steps that we're taking, back once we kind of knew that Kennedy was going to be leaving, we began having conversations as elders, looking at that list that we talked about that we knew we needed to address. We had been talking about, do we have some budget space to find a part-time youth person? Whenever all of a sudden Kennedy ended up resigning and taking a different role, that opened up some extra funds to where all of a sudden it became, well, do we try to do a part-time youth person? To now it's like, we're realistically looking at the funds to do a more entry to mid-level full-time role. So what we've been looking at for the last 2 months, it's been posted now for, I think this week we're going to hit the 2-month mark. We've been looking at a full-time youth and worship position that the posting officially went live end of July. What we've done with that so far, we posted it on what is like the largest kind of church job database that's out there. It's also, our denomination has a website called UB Central, which is where a lot of the people in the UB will go and check for information. It's been posted on there. I've also spent time, I've reached out to Huntington University, which is our denominational college. I've talked to some of my former students that are attending down there to even see like, hey, who do you know that's coming through the program or that maybe has graduated? I've reached out to a number of the local colleges here in town and just kind of worked the network, put out feelers. There's been a few people that looked like potential and then those doors would shut, one of whom, kind of funnily enough, was actually be a cousin of Jazzy who was here this morning. But we missed him by about 2 weeks. We were close. But so there's been a few little things like that have popped up. In terms of the posting itself, we paid to have it listed for 2 months. That 2 months is about to end. And through that, we've had 2 applicants, one of whom was somebody from Brazil living in Paraguay who applied for our job. And so I interacted with him a little bit, seemed like a nice guy. And I was like, so like, though, like this is in the States. Are you looking to move to the States? He's like, well, that could be cool. I'm like, okay. But probably not very cost effective, and definitely English as a second language and some of that. And just there were some concerns there. The other applicant was somebody local, but just after looking into it, it just would not have been a great fit, which means that we're now coming up on the end of a 2-month listing, and we're still kind of like, all right, like what's going on? Like where are we going next? So really to share that, I mean, we're actively looking, we're using the resources that we have, but we're still at a place right now where we're just not sure what's next. We have an elder meeting tomorrow night. It was supposed to be this afternoon, which would have given us some more information, but I realized that doing a wedding rehearsal Friday, doing a wedding yesterday, doing church this morning, and an elder meeting and a congregational meeting, I would not have been awake tonight. So we moved the elder meeting, so we'll have some more discussions to have tomorrow night in terms of next steps. But know that we are looking, know that we do have some funding that it looks like, we have room in the budget with the way that God's been kind of moving and shaping things to where we do feel comfortable looking to make a hire. We just have to figure out, does it make sense to keep going in a full-time youth worship role, or do we need to make some adjustments? So those are things at the elder level that we are trying to figure out right now. But what I will say on the next slide here, just a few thoughts is, and this first one, honestly, I think is probably more for me than for you. But let's just be patient in the process. What I don't want to do is, just because we see the needs and just because the funding is there, I don't want to be in a rush to fill a role, to fill a hole that we sense, and then end up hiring the wrong person. For me, especially looking at what God is doing, I'm more concerned about making sure we get the right person in these roles than just getting a person. If it means we have to be thin and we've got to kind of work together and lean on each other a little bit to keep things moving for a little while longer than we would like, that's okay. We can do that. We can get by. It's more important that we get the person that God is calling into this role than just rushing. So I'm just going to ask, be patient with us, be patient with me, for me to be patient with God as we go through this process, because again, we want to make sure we get the right person. And for me, looking at the trends that we're seeing in the church, again, more than just getting somebody in those ministries, I want to make sure that we hire and that we staff ourselves in a situation where we're actually looking at increased growth and greater impact moving forward. So instead of just getting somebody in, I want to make sure we get somebody that can help us continue to move forward. So, going to the next part here, which I want to take just for a minute. I'm going to try, I know I already preached at you this morning, so I'm going to try not to get on my soapbox right now. But I do want to talk about family ministry a little bit. We've been having a number of conversations as elders, because for one, anytime you hire a former youth pastor to come in as a senior pastor, like family ministry, youth ministry is something I'm passionate about. It's something I love to talk about, and I love to tinker and just kind of see like what is God doing, not just in our church, not just in our area, but in the world, and what are the trends that we're seeing in the church. And so family ministry is something that we've had a lot of conversations about, and especially whenever you have a staffing transition, it begins to open up conversations about, okay, so we've been doing it this way for a while. Do we need to change? Is this still working? Are we still being effective? Is God calling us to try something new? So we're having these conversations, but what I want to start with tonight, and this is going to be the interactive portion, it's an easy question, but I want to ask you, whenever you think about family ministry, when you think about children's and youth ministry, what comes to mind for you? We'll start with that question. You can just shout it out. You don't have to raise your hand. Or anything. Foundation for biblical teaching? Good. Good. What else? When you think about children's ministry, about youth ministry, what is that picture that you have in your mind? Chaos. Spoken like a true youth pastor's wife. Uh-huh. Older generation raising younger. Yeah, good. Good. The future, yeah. What else? What do you picture when you think about youth and children's ministry? Pouring into our future. Good. Man, you guys are making this too easy. I like this. I fully agree with you. As I look at kind of the state of youth ministry, as I look at the state of children's ministry, again, I'm kind of a church junkie. I'm a youth ministry junkie. I love looking at this stuff. But if you look at our country, if you look in America, what children's ministry, what youth ministry has looked like really over the past about 50 years now, I know for me, you guys are honestly being more spiritual than I am. Because in my mind, I start picturing the programs. I start picturing, all the years of youth ministry that I led and the fun programs and the games and the food fights and the sledding parties and all those fun activities, which are awesome, which are good things. But that's what I tend to think of. And honestly, for the last 50 years, that's kind of what youth ministry, what kids ministry has looked like in churches. If you go back in history, it was about in the 1970s. There's a little bit of maybe variation here. But this is whenever you started really seeing program-based family ministry. And Sunday school was already around. That was kind of here. But as mega churches started coming into existence, started becoming more popular, they started having the resources to ask the questions of like, well, what would it look like if we were to have a program, to have a service that was built just for youth or just for children? And so they started pouring the resources into that, and we started seeing the more programmatic approach where it required highly skilled, highly capable people with education to come in, well, except maybe not education in youth ministry because youth pastors are crazy, but at least in children's ministry, people with a lot of education, with a big heart to come in and craft these programs, to lead these programs. And it took a lot of volunteers to do these things. And then over the years, as the megachurch boom increased, especially through the 90s and the early thousands, and we started having social media and internet, and so it became more prevalent, you could see what other churches were doing, everything began to gravitate towards making these awesome youth ministry programs, these awesome kids ministry programs, and a lot of good came from that. I mean, I'm a product of that. Probably a lot of us in this room were shaped maybe it was a youth pastor or by a youth ministry program or by a children's pastor or by a children's ministry program. Like, we've seen the positive effects. So what I want to make sure you don't hear over the next few minutes is that those things were bad. I think those were tools that God gave the church for a season, and I think they had some impact. But what's interesting as you start looking at the trends, at the same time where about in the 70s program-based family ministries began, there were certain trends that we started to see that started to kind of trend downward. So if you go to the next slide here, so 1970s, that begins. And 2001, the SBC, the Southern Baptist Convention, started doing some research to see, okay, how are our young adults doing? How are our high schoolers doing? And what they found is 70% of teens stop attending church within 2 years of graduating high school. And that was a number that, if I remember correctly, dropped from about 40 to 50% back in 1970 to in 2001 is at 70%. So that was just in the Southern Baptist Convention. In 2006, Barna, who is a nationwide group, did a very similar poll. They found in the nationwide poll of more denominations, 61% of teens stopped attending church within 2 years of graduating high school. In 2007, Lifeway did similar research. They found that 70% leave faith in college, with only 35% eventually returning. More research continues. If you get to about, I believe 2011 was the next one. I cannot remember who this one came from, but they found in 2011 that 3 out of 5 young Christians disconnect from the church after the age of 15. In 2019, there were 2 big studies that came out, one by Barna, one by Lifeway. What Barna found is that 66% of young adults who attended church regularly, so didn't just come once or twice, but who attended church regularly as teens, left sometime between the age of 18 and 22. 29% of those that left said they left because they no longer felt connected in their church. They've gone through all these programs, and 29% still feel like they just aren't connected to their church. The Lifeway research done in 2019, there was a quote that came out of that you'll see on the next slide here. While older generations who left the church in their youth typically returned to church once they got married and had children, something changed around 1970. Fewer people return to church when they move into their 30s. That trademark return to church, which pastors and church leaders have relied on for decades, might be fading. And what they mean by that is, for the longest time, even as some of these numbers started coming out, it's like, well, once they have kids, once they get married, then they'll come back to church. And for a while, that was the case. Research is starting to show that might not be the case any longer. And so I'm not trying to be doom and gloom. And even, again, I'm not convinced that these two are tied together, but when you begin to see the rise of program-based youth and children's ministry, and you begin to see these trends of more and more young adults leaving the church, even if they've grown up in the church, even if they've been actively engaged in the church, you start to see that maybe there's a disconnect. Maybe there's something wrong here. Maybe there's something that we need to evaluate, or maybe something we need to rethink. For me, I did youth ministry for 11 years, and I can tell you, especially those first about 7 years, I was gung-ho. Like, I was convinced that if I got the right youth program, if we tweaked it just right, if we had the right music, if I taught the right way, then we could grow and we could be like these other big youth ministries. And everything became about, yes, I love being with the students, but so much of it became about, how do I make my program better? And I had some good students that came through, but honestly, the students that stuck in the church are the ones that, sure, they were involved in the program, but they were doing Bible studies. They were more engaged. They were doing different things. But I was just so obsessed with the programs and asking these questions of, how do I make a bigger program? And then finally, that led to me working at a large church where I was leading a larger program that had the bigger budget, that had the better tools, that had the cooler lights and the louder sound system. Like, I reached, in my mind, what was the pinnacle of youth ministry, only to find out that they were facing the exact same problems that I was in the small church. They were seeing the same decline. They were still struggling to connect with the next generations. And that led me to start asking questions of, okay, well then, if it's not the program, like, what is it? If the program isn't making a difference, if it's not connecting in the way that we want it to connect, is there something that we're missing? And as I look at this data, and as I've done more research over the years, there's part of me that just wonders, as we started making youth ministry, as we started making kids ministry so programmatic, where it was highly specialized, where it took professionals, awesome professionals, of which, at one point, I don't know if I was awesome, but I was one of those professionals. It took these people to lead these programs. What tended to happen is more and more discipleship of the next generation was placed in the hands of these programs and these few highly specialized people who are often facing burnout, and less in the hands of parents. If you look at the way that so many churches are operating today, there's data out there, like more and more they're finding, as families, as we talked about this morning, as families are getting busier and busier and busier, larger churches with resources are finding that the idea of trying to get a family to come on Sunday morning and then to bring their kids back on Wednesday night, it just isn't effective. So in addition to their awesome, high budget, big budget Sunday morning children's activities, a lot of those churches have started moving youth ministry to Sunday during service as well. And what that does is, you can have a child born into a church, go all the way to 18 to graduate high school, only having sat in a church service a handful of times. And we wonder why they feel disconnected after they graduate. Because we've never had them engaged in the church. We've replaced the family, we've replaced church engagement with programs. And programs aren't bad, there's still a need for them. But if we idolize the programs, if we make it more about how do we build a better program and less about how do we walk alongside parents, then I think we start to miss the mark and we start to see those trends that we just pointed out a second ago. So this is something that we've talked about a little bit, that Lifeway research as well. I want to go back to that for a second. Let's kind of come to the positive a little bit. We've talked about maybe why they're leaving. The Lifeway research in 2019 also asked, for those that stayed in the church, why did they stay? Here's 6 reasons really quickly. The top answer, 56% of students that stuck it out said that the church was a vital part of their relationship with God. They understood the importance of attending church, of being engaged in the church with their relationship with their spiritual health. 54% said that they wanted the church to help guide their decisions in everyday life. So they wanted continued guidance and involvement from the church as they moved into the future. Going to number 3 and number 4. 43% said they wanted to follow the example of a parent or other family member. So 43% of students that stayed because there was a family member or a parent that was modeling it for them. There was somebody that they wanted to continue to follow the example of. 39% say they continue to attend because church activities were a big part of their life, so they were very engaged with the church. Number 5 and 6. 39% say they felt church was helping them become a better person, and 37% say they were committed to the purpose and the work of the church. These are the reasons, according to this massive research done by Lifeway, for why students stuck it out. We see those that leave. Here's why they stayed. The ones that stood out to me, 56% understood the importance of being engaged in the church. 43% had a family member or a parent who was modeling it, who was discipling them. And 37% realized that they could and they should be part of the church. There was a place for them. And so what I want to make sure I say very clearly, as I say all of this, as we look at this, this is not to make light of what we've done here at Banner Church. We're at where we're at today for a reason. We've seen benefits. Kara has done a phenomenal job. Those that have worked in youth ministry have done a great job, which is why we have the young people in this church today that we do. There have been positives. But these are the things that we're wrestling with as we look at the future of what does family ministry look like at Banner Church. These are the things that we're trying to use to reevaluate, to figure out, okay, God, like what are you calling us to? I mean, do we just keep trying to do what everybody else is doing and just build better programs and build better programs? And if our program here at Banner is better than the program at First Cutlerville down the road, then maybe some of them will start coming here, or maybe the new families moving into the community will start coming here. If we just make it about building a better program and hiring a better youth pastor or hiring a better children's pastor, we can do that. And there's formulas out there that show that you can get people to come, but we also see that it shows that a lot of them are going to leave. So is there a better way? Is there something more that we can do? Which leads me to the question of, okay, so where do we go now? And this is something, I mean, again, since I got here, we've been talking about as elders. We've asked a lot of these questions, and we've even asked, okay, so what would it look like to approach family ministry in a way that looks at these reasons of why students are staying? What would it look like if instead of just being so focused on building a better program, we started saying, okay, well, if students are staying because it's being modeled for them by a family member, if students are staying because they realize that there's a place for them in the church, if students are staying because they see that the church is a vital part of their spiritual life, what would it look like to build towards those things instead of just trying to build a better program? And so there's 2 statements where we kind of landed on as elders that have shaped the way that we've approached our next steps moving forward. The first one is this: the family should be the primary source of discipleship in a child's life. That might sound like common sense, but this is something as we landed on it, it's like, man, this makes sense. It's simple, but it changes the way we go about this. Because if we truly believe that the family should be the primary source of discipleship in a child's life, then that goes to number 2, which is that the role of the church is not to replace the family, but to equip it. as we look at the way we approach these ministries, as we look to make hires, as we look to rebuild, what we're looking to do is not to build a program where parents can just come in, drop their kids off, and say, all right, I hope you guys figure it out. I'm going to go enjoy church now. What we're looking to do is build a way of going about family ministry as a church to where as families come in, we're not taking the responsibility of discipleship off of their shoulders. Instead, we're saying, how can we come alongside you? How can we equip you? How can we build you up so that you can better disciple your children? Because as we saw in the numbers, so often the ones that stayed, the ones that stuck it out, come from families where they are being discipled in the home. I want you to think of your own life for a second. And again, there's nuance in this, but I can almost bet that for the majority of us in this room, sure, we went to church, sure, we probably went through different programs, but most likely we had at least one parent or a grandparent or somebody who modeled the Christian walk in front of us. There was probably a family member in our life who discipled us, who mentored us, who showed us the importance of following Jesus, who showed us the importance of the church. So for us as we move forward, we don't want to replace that. We want to lean into that. We don't want to take the role of discipleship away from the family or out of the home and into a program. Instead, we want any program that we do to build up families, to equip them so that they can better disciple their children. Now, what does that look like in actuality? What does that look like in reality? That's a great question. And that's honestly for us as elders as we wrestled with that. I mean, you've got a bunch of old white dudes, myself, I'm just including myself, sorry. And now, Vince, we're young. We agree. No. But if you got just a bunch of men sitting in a room saying, well, this is how I think we should do kids ministry. We're going to do this program, and it's going to go like this. And it doesn't make a lot of sense. For us as elders, as we wrestled with this and as we landed on these two ideas that the family should be the primary source of discipleship in a child's life, and number two, that the job of the church is not to replace the family but to equip it, what we quickly realize is, okay, we believe this, and we believe this is the way that God is calling us, but we need an architect. We need somebody that understands this vision, and we need somebody that understands children, that understands families, that can help us figure out what does this look like for us as a church. And as we started having those conversations, and as elders were talking about that, and for Alicia and I, as we began having time to hang out with Ashley and Joseph and have conversations, and I was having conversations with Ashley, quickly we realized, like, oh, the person's sitting right here. We have, as Ashley and I talked and had some different conversations, quickly I saw, man, like she gets what we're talking about. She understands this vision. And Ashley, she's got a master's in, what is it again? Biblical Studies from Grand Rapids Theological Seminary, which is a way more impressive sounding degree than mine. It's awesome. So I'm excited about that, but also just years of ministry experience. And there's things that she's excited about that we're excited about. So we had her go through the interview process. We had Bill sit out because we didn't want any bias. And I was so excited because when we had the first interview, and I tried to stay in the background a little bit, but after Ashley walked out, to hear the other elders in the room be like, yep, like there it is. This is what we've been looking forward to. That's what we've been looking for. That's why we made the decision. We realized we need, if we're going to rebuild this, we need somebody that understands this vision, that understands families, that has a heart to equip families, and to have that sitting right in our own congregation, like how amazing is that? And to have the resources around her, to have Kara with her years of experience to lean into that, to have the strong core of volunteers that this church has to rally around Ashley, it just sets us up as she comes on board to start asking these questions, to begin reevaluating how we're doing things, and to begin operating in a way that is less focused on building some awesome program and more focused on building up the families of Banner Church and of our community. So that's why we took that step. As we look ahead, as we look at youth ministry, it brings us back to that question, okay, what does youth ministry look like that prioritizes getting students engaged in the church? What does youth ministry look like that prioritizes building up the family? Those are great questions. That one I have a little more expertise in, but I also have a lot less time than I used to for youth ministry. So that's why we're looking to make a hire in that area to try to figure things out. We're trying to rebuild with this understanding that the church shouldn't be pushing the family out, but instead should be walking alongside the family and raising them up. So it's going to take time for this to come together because, again, this doesn't enable us to go out and just hire anybody that has a heart for youth ministry. We really have to be diligent in finding somebody who understands the DNA of Banner Church, who understands the steps that we're trying to take, who's not going to come in and be like, okay, that sounds cool, but I'm going to build a big program. We want somebody that's going to come in, that's going to catch this vision, that can be an architect, that can help us build this up. So there's a lot of questions still on exactly, okay, well, what is this going to look like come January? And honestly, if I had a guess, it'll probably take a little bit of time to really see much big change. If I had a guess, most likely we're going to be looking at next fall is when you might see some changes. But some of the things that we've discussed, and I know one of the things that Ashley is really excited about and I'm excited about, is what would it look like? One of the questions we've asked is what would it look like if we ourselves, I mean, there's great curriculum that's out there, but when you're working with generic curriculum, a lot of times it's not geared right for your church. I mean, there might be good things, but you have to adjust it. What would it look like if we began to build our own curriculum that wasn't just for the kids ministry, but instead, whatever we're preaching on Sunday morning, if Ashley and I began to work together, and if we someday have a youth pastor to work to be in on those conversations, and so say that, this morning we talked about Sabbath. What would it look like to build a curriculum to where on Sunday morning we're preaching about Sabbath and we're giving practical tools on, okay, what does Sabbath look like for a family? As the kids then go into Kids City or Sunday school, they're talking about Sabbath at their level. They're talking about what Sabbath could look like for them. In the adult Sunday school classes, we're diving deeper. Today, the women's class they were my guinea pigs on that a little bit today, of having these conversations of, okay, let's dive deeper into what Scripture says about Sabbath. And to where all of a sudden, at all the levels trickling down from the sermon, from the Sunday morning service, the whole family is having the same conversation. And so then on the car ride home, then throughout the week, these conversations can continue. Can we build tools that help equip and make it even more so about what is happening in the home throughout the week to help further that? That's a gift that Ashley has, of something that I'm passionate about. So that's one thing we're talking about. Another thing that we've discussed is, for one, we've already talked about we're looking to expand the nursery to increase the age gap and to get more of the small children in there. But already, this morning, I love preaching in this current setup, having our three elementary boys sitting right here. There's something exciting about having those boys sitting there, and it takes me back even to, I remember as an elementary school kid down in Tulsa, Oklahoma, sitting in church, and honestly, I was never diagnosed ADD, but I think it's just because they never took me to the doctor for that. But I can remember sitting there and being distracted. I was talking to my brother just this week. We were hanging out, and I was talking to him, reminiscing of man, do you remember how we were sitting in service, and neither one of us could remember any of the sermons, but we could both remember digging through the hymnals looking for hymns written by Fannie J. Crosby because we thought Fannie was a funny word. We can remember that. I can vividly remember my grandpa being the song leader and with his sometimes off-key but big booming voice leading hymns in church. I can remember the one time my parents made the mistake of letting me wear my fire truck shoes to Sunday night service, that had a little button that when you pushed it, the fire siren went off, which I did. My mom quickly covered it, and those shoes never made an appearance in church again. But a part of me wonders, how formational were those moments of, okay, yes, sure, I was young, and so I don't remember what the pastor was talking about. I don't remember the sermons. But there's so many of those little moments where I was learning to be a part of the church, where I was sitting alongside my parents, watching them worship. I'm watching my grandpa lead worship. I'm watching my parents engage and listen, and I'm seeing modeled for me what it looks like to sit in a church service and to be a part of a church service. What would it look like for us? And it might feel small church, but what would it look like for us if maybe some of our older kids were actually more engaged in the service? What would it look like if, maybe we have some tools or things to help them kind of stay focused in church? But what would it look like if we, again, began asking them to, hey, let's stay in here with your parents and sit alongside them and learn together and have this modeled. But even with that, what would it look like if not only were our kids and our youth being asked to sit and just listen, but if we began seeing them more involved in the service? Today, one of the things I was so excited about in having Jazzy come over, we had a 16-year-old leading us as adults in worship this morning. How cool is that? And this is a girl that just a few years ago, as an 8th grader, was just learning to play guitar, and look at what God is doing. What happens when maybe we're willing, because I can tell you, going back to 9th grade when I first started using her on Sunday mornings, I had somebody who I loved that was involved in tech that came to me after the first Sunday she helped lead. And it's I don't know what you're doing. She's not ready. She shouldn't be on the stage yet. And I told him, just wait. I wasn't either my first time. The first time as an 8th grader that I stepped on stage to play bass guitar, as the senior pastor was praying at the end of the prayer, I stepped on my cable and unplugged it, causing a loud pop in the sound system, only to then, because I was so nervous, grab it and plug it back in, making it pop again, to which he turned and looked back at me. I wasn't ready either. But I wouldn't be where I'm at today if somebody didn't take a chance on me. If somebody wasn't willing to maybe see the level of excellence dip a little bit, but ultimately be raised. We wouldn't have been led in worship today with Jazzy if she wasn't given those opportunities whenever she was younger, and even now as she's learning and growing. And as I look at the students that we have in our church right now, there's the part of me that just wonders, man, what could we see from them in 2, 3, 4 years? What could we see? I mean, Noisy Offering is awesome. When I first saw it, when we first were interviewing, I saw it on a live stream. If I'm honest, there was still part of me that was still so used to the big church mentality that I was like, yep, that's going to get canceled. Like, that's going away. But then I came and I saw it. And I was like, man, how cool is this, though? These kids are engaged in the service. And to see the way that this church rallied around that, these kids were being shown, hey, you matter here. What would it look like for us to lean into that even more? To begin giving opportunities, to begin helping these kids find their gifts and give them opportunities to be mentored and taught in that, and then ultimately to use those gifts. It can get messy. There's probably going to be more distractions in a church service. That's okay. I don't mind the distractions. Honestly, I kind of enjoy hearing babies crying because that means we have babies in this church. That means we have a future. These are the things that we're wrestling with. So I don't have the answers tonight in terms of, I can't tell you, in 2 years, this is what family ministry is going to look like at Banner Church. I have no idea. I don't know what the program is going to look like. I don't know. What I do know, though, is as a group of elders, we are committed to this idea that the family should be the primary source of discipleship for children. And that as the church, our role is not to replace the family, but is to equip it. That's how we're trying to move forward. Those are the things that we're wrestling with. Those are the things to where maybe as we start seeing some changes, there might be times where you have questions, and please feel free to ask them. But you might start wondering, why are we doing that? Or what's the point of this? Know that this is the focus. That's the goal. That's what we're moving towards. We don't know what every next step looks like, but we know that we want to take steps in that direction. So for tonight, that's all I've got to share on that, I believe. I'm looking at my notes to make sure I don't miss anything. But what I want you to hear for now is, again, I know it's not the clearest picture of this is exactly what we're doing. But I wanted to have this opportunity tonight to share with you, first of all, again, if you look at attendance and finances and all that, like God is providing, God is faithful, God is putting us in a position to where we can ask questions about the future in a positive way, to where we can dream about what God is up to, and God's giving us the tools to approach that. I can tell you that God is laying this on our hearts as we've been praying, God, what is your will for this church? The resounding answer so far seems to be that God's will for this church is to equip families, to lean into these young families that we have. That's the direction that we're going. We're still trying to figure things out. But that as a church, that seems to be what God is up to. That's what we're committed to. That's what we're taking steps towards. We'll see what clarity looks like as that comes. But for now, that's where we're at. So I'll stop preaching and I'll open it up again. Any thoughts, questions, comments on that? Yes, Kim.
I think it's a great idea to get the kids, interacting and whatnot. In fact, at our daughter and son-in-law's church, our granddaughter is 6 years old.
Mm-hmm.
She's singing on the worship team
Mm-hmm.
because the worship director saw her with the microphone when her parents were there.
Yep.
And she loves performing. And she actually has a good voice.
Yep.
He's got her on the worship team, and she feels comfortable doing it.
Yep.
And what a great thing. Like some of these boys, who knows,
Yep.
maybe they're a drummer or something,
Yep. I know there's one that wants to be. I was going to say, I don't know if the parents want him to be, but yeah. Yeah.
We
Yep.
saw that too with Ashley and Amber before you came. When they were young,
Yep.
they were up there singing,
Yep. I genuinely, and I think what has helped reassure me on some of this is as we've looked at just the history of Banner Church, I think these roots have been there. As you said, with Ashley and Amber and others, how many people have come through this church that were given opportunities as kids or teens that are now in ministry? the roots are there. I think now it's just time to say, hey, we see this and we're going all in on that. Any other thoughts, questions? Yes, Vince.
As we've been having some of these conversations, maybe think about my neighbors that I've talked to. Some of you might remember my neighbor Joe had the cancer, and some of you guys in the prayer team were praying for him, and that's all been in remission. But I've talked to them a couple times about coming to church, and they went for a while, and then kind of stopped during COVID. It would be such an amazing. This church would be such an amazing fit for them. But one of the things that she told me is that she's very hesitant to go back to church because their son, I think he's 8 or 9. He has like diagnosed ADD, like he's to learn he's on maximum medication
Yep.
because he's like otherwise bouncing off walls. And she's just very nervous about what happened in like disrupting the flow of in a new church, and you send your kid to the youth ministry or whatever. So she's just nervous about it. And I would love to be a church that's just has a lot of grace for kids yelling in service and whatever.
Yep.
Being part of that because it's part of the culture where we recognize that this is the next generation, and we're not gonna stifle down the what matters of raising these kids up in the family and the church environment in that community that's so desperately important so that you don't have that dropout. So what I think about when I look at those statistics is when it's that program based, it's like, well, when they become adults, there's not really, you don't have that program that's just dedicated to them. It's like here you show up and you can just dive into this program that's helping you.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden you're an adult and it's like, well, now you actually have to choose and you have to have a value structure that's orienting you towards a pursuit that you're going to be engaged in, like
Yep.
a community that you're going to be part of. So yeah, I think it's desperately important
Yep.
to get kids involved at the ground level. But anyway, yeah, like
Yeah.
to be able to have a culture that's going to like put our arms around people like that and be like, you know what, just relax, it's okay.
Yep.
Your kid is a little wild.
Yep.
So
Well, and I think kind of speaking to that, I mean, one of the concerns, and even for myself, that I have as I think about some of this is, again, there's just something in my brain because of my first 7 or so years in ministry where it's all focused on church growth and on excellence and all these things, which are still good things. They're not the goals, but they're good things. And there's that voice in the back of my head that's like, oh, is this small church? Is this small church? Is this small church? But I think, honestly, we've made small church a dirty word in the church, and I don't know that it needs to be. And honestly, I don't even think that we're going to stay small. I don't think the goal should be size. I think, again, the goal should be, are we being a congregation? Are we growing together? Are we following after Christ? And yes, growth will come. And sometimes by losing the program, like programs are great for scaling because programs can grow. Doing ministry as community, sometimes there tends to be a lid, and it seems like that lid tends to be somewhere in the 300 to 500 range. And so there's a chance if you look at the rate of the trends that we're seeing that we might at some point climb and hit that again. And the question then becomes like, well, what do you do now? And if doing ministry this way kind of caps us, what do we do with that? And the question is, I mean, we'll get to it in the spring when we go back to Acts, but you look at what the early church did. They kept spreading. The goal was never to see some massive mega church. And I'm not anti-mega church. There's some good ones that are out there. But the goal isn't to see how many people can we fit in a building, because the reality is once you're getting past that 300 to 500 group size, what starts to happen is that you look at the sense of community that we have here at Banner Church, that is something that starts to dissipate. You can only have so much community to a certain extent, but as you grow, it starts to become more focused on the programs, more focused on the senior pastor and his preaching, more focused on the music, and those connections start to dissipate. So for us, the question then doesn't become, all right, well, how do we build a bigger building, which maybe we need to expand a little bit someday, we'll see. But more so, my thought is, how do we take what God is doing here and spread that into the surrounding communities? So don't be afraid of, like, what if this looks a little messier and it makes it harder for us to grow into a big church? That's okay. Because I would rather see Banner Church someday be 10, like a network of 10 churches of 100 to 300 with godly community where people are being mentored, where kids are being raised in the church and they're sticking it out, than for us to be a church of 10,000 where 70% are leaving and never coming back after they graduate. Like I'm not worried about the polish. I'm not worried about trying to grow into a mega church. I'm worried about being faithful to where God is calling us. And I'm worried about seeing our next generation actually growing in their faith and sticking in the church. And so it might look a little different than what we're used to. But if we look at what we're used to and where that leads, maybe it's time to look for a new path. Any other thoughts or questions, and also any updates on the Lions game? Haven't checked in a while. Anybody got the Lions score? Anybody? All right, Sam, you got it? Okay. Still 2010. Hey, I'll take it. We're not losing. All right. Well, it's 7 o'clock. I don't want to keep us here too long, so I guess just one last time I'll ask any questions. And also know that if you think of questions, I mean, please feel free to talk to me or the elders. I'll be hanging around for a little bit tonight, as long as I don't know, how much time's left in the game? Okay. No, I'll be around for a little bit, so please feel free to ask questions. But just one last time, any thoughts, questions, comments on anything tonight? Yes, Carolyn.
How are we going to build up volunteers?
Yep, that's a great question.
How are we going to build up volunteers?
Yep.
How are we going to raise people of the church to be volunteers?
Yep, that's a great question. And I think that's the important thing, too, as we look at this, is we can have all these dreams, but at the end of the day, and this is why I try to harp on this sometimes, if you look at the prevailing trend in the American church, it tends, the magnetic pull is towards comfort and consumerism. I think more and more what we as a church have to continue to understand, and honestly, if you look at the ratios in the church, we are a pretty engaged church. I would say comparatively, we have a pretty high percentage of people in the church that are volunteering in some capacity. But the reality is, for us to expand, for us to do more, it takes more volunteers. And so I think the biggest thing is going to be changing the mindset of understanding if you're going to be a part of Banner Church, we're so glad that you're here. But if you're just coming and sitting and not being engaged, ultimately you're harming the church, and not just Banner Church. But I mean, look at Scripture. I mean, look at 1 Corinthians and look at Romans when it talks about we're all part of the body. And if part of the body isn't doing its role, that body is not healthy. So it's trying to get that mindset of understanding part of being in the church, part of being part of a church means being engaged and involved in the church.
Well, I just don't see all of the things that we're planning as a family ministry being accomplishable without
Yep.
an army of volunteers.
I 100% agree. I 100% agree. Honestly, I think what this is going to have to look like is truly going to be, this is going to have to be a multi-generational effort. It's going to have to be from the top down. And to part of it, I guess, to answer that, Carolyn, programs take volunteers. Community takes engagement. If we keep trying to add more and more and more programs, with every new program we add, more volunteers are needed. If you look at the numbers, so again, right now we're averaging around 140. So let's say, I'm bad at math, so somebody can give me a percentage, but like let's say we have 100 of that 140 that are actively engaged, actively serving. That gives us a pretty good volunteer pool, but all of a sudden, okay, let's take out about the 15 that are serving as greeters. Let's take out about the 20 that are serving in the worship team. Let's take out the other 20 that are serving in the kids ministry. And all of a sudden, it starts really dwindling unless we're asking people to double up or triple up in serving. So what I want us to be careful of as a church is if we think that more programs is going to bring growth, maybe, but more programs also spread us thinner. So what I want us to focus on is how do we really kind of focus in on and how do we narrow in on what truly matters. So asking people to put more time into a few things that move us forward as a church and less on trying to keep a ton of ministries afloat. So with that though, as we kind of go with that mindset, what we need to see is honestly, we need grandparents, we need people in their 60s, 70s that are involved in mentoring and walking alongside these families. If we're trying not necessarily to build a big program, but we're trying to get more intergenerational mingling, it still takes volunteers, but it makes it more just part of the community. Part of the understanding is if you're here at Banner Church, we expect that you're interacting with the younger generations, with the families. It makes it a little bit less about building up volunteers and more about just being engaged in the multi-generational community. So it takes volunteers. We're going to have to figure that out. But more than anything, it's just creating that understanding that if you're here at Banner Church, you're part of the family and you have a role to play in mentoring the next generations. So it's gonna take some time, for sure. That's a great question, though.
I think too, we have to be intentional too on who we're going to ask to be on our teams.
Yep.
And ask the Lord for wisdom and discernment, not just pick every Tom, Dick, and Harry just because they're Tom, Dick, and Harry.
Yep.
But you as a leader in a department here should be looking and saying, I'm going to pray. I'm going to ask the Lord for wisdom and discernment on who I'm going to ask. And then try to mentor that person. Hey, would you come with me to the nursery for a few weeks and see how you like it?
Yeah.
It might be a good fit. Or would you come and serve in first grade in the Sunday school class or whatever?
Yep.
And see how and mentor that person.
Yep.
But it's our job as leaders to fill those positions.
Yep.
It's not the elders and the pastors, it's us. And I know I say it because this is what I'm all about. We got to pray.
Yep.
We have to pray. Nothing is going to be done without prayer. I'm sorry, it's not.
Yep.
So if you are a leader in a department, I challenge you to pray, to ask God to give you wisdom.
Yep.
There's 140 people here. Well, look around and see who those 140 people are.
Yep.
You know, we need a youth pastor. We need a worship leader. Just like when we brought Byron and Alicia, I remember Dawn saying, you know, how we're going to do this. And I got up and said, we got to pray.
Yep.
Well, you know what, church? We got to pray. We got
Yep.
to pray for the youth and the worship leader. That God will bring somebody here that will serve alongside us.
Yep.
And see Banner go forward.
Yep.
That's what we got to do.
Yep.
I'll take that as a lead-in to invite everyone to Thursday night, 7 o'clock in the library, and enough of you come. We'll move to a bigger room
Yep.
for prayer team.
Yep.
Also,
Yep.
there's a nursery sign up.
Good plug there, Jared. Thank you. Yeah. Yes.
One of the things that I've noticed over the years that I've been coming here is we have a lot of traffic around our church.
Yep.
And I remember mentioning to someone
Yep.
when the condo started around here, it's like a field of new people.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like, and I know I've talked about getting a better sign out in front.
Yep.
And I know that the elders, deacons checked into it and it's very expensive.
Yep.
But I feel like, even when I talk to people that know me, they don't have any idea what goes on here. And there are so many good programs here involving children or adults.
Yep.
That if people that go by see something on there that's inviting,
Yep.
you know, I know we have some kid programs that are really successful.
Mm-hmm.
Things like that. So I wish in the future some,
Mm-hmm.
that, you know, if I die tomorrow, I'd be glad to use some money for a sign.
Yep.
It's just something that's been on my heart that I think
Yeah.
will help us a lot with our numbers. And who knows,
Yep.
here coming a talent, people that haven't been coming here might run to church.
Absolutely. And I appreciate that. I think anybody, I mean, it's one of those things, kind of like in your own home. There's, that broken whatever it is that you walk by every day and you finally get used to it and you just kind of forget it's there. For a lot of us, I mean, I'm sure at some point we've all noticed, like, yeah, our sign's not the prettiest thing ever, but we've probably gotten used to it. But again, it definitely, it does give a perception to the community.
It's not big enough, really.
Yeah.
Has anyone ever chosen to sign up? Has anyone ever here chosen to go to church based off the sign?
Well, and that's a good question. And that leads to the second thing I was going to say, though. Well, two thoughts here for you. I'm going to try to keep this brief because I don't want to keep us here all night. Oh, yeah. He was just asking for any of us, have we ever chosen to go to a church simply because of a church sign? Yeah. The two thoughts I would say is, one, right now, if you look at the direction we're going as a church, if you look at what we're focused on, the word that I would still use to describe this season is rebuild. We're very much in a season after what we've gone through where we're trying to figure out, okay, God, what are you calling us towards, and now how do we restructure? I think we've gone through a lot of the healing, and now we're trying to figure out where are we going. In a season of rebuilding, oftentimes the focus is going to be a little more internal. We just have to be careful of not letting it get stuck there. I can tell you it's already on my mind, and I don't know what it looks like. But as we look to rebuild, as we start to get some of these things figured out here and we get some of these pieces in place, I think very quickly the next season is going to have to be more outward focused. The next season is going to be, okay, we've rebuilt here. We know who God's called us to be. At some point in the next couple of years, I think the trend is going to shift to, okay, now how are we reaching out into our community? And that's where I think some of those questions of, okay, how are we engaging? We need to start asking those. And with that, I'll keep this so brief. I'm a pastor, so it's hard to do this. To me, as much as I do agree we got to do something with our church sign at some point. It's outdated. But I would rather see our church grow not from being the best branded, the best marketed, the best whatever, because we can put a lot of money into souping up our website and our social media and our property and all of that. What I would rather see, though, is, as you mentioned, I mean, we have these condos going in across the street. We have the neighborhood getting built behind us. We have the new neighborhood a little further down 68th where they're about to start building. We have all of that. But also in a lot of those neighborhoods, we have people from our congregation living in them. Rather than investing in a newer sign or rather than investing in marketing and branding, I would rather be investing in our people and equipping them to go and be the best billboard that we can put in that neighborhood. I would rather our outreach be less focused on, okay, what is the church doing as the corporation to reach out, and more about what is the church as the body, as the individuals doing to reach into our community. So I think there are some of those things. That doesn't mean we just let the building fall apart and we get used to the broken sign and all that. There's still things we need to polish up. But I think as our eyes start to become less inward in the rebuild and more outward in the outreach, I think for us, at least for me, my focus would be on how do we build up each other to be reaching out wherever God has planted us. So that season will be coming. So I love where your heart is at in that. Okay, it's 7:12. I don't want to cut off conversations. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pray to wrap this up. So if you need to go and catch the end of the Lions game, you can do so. But if you have questions, if you want to stick around and talk, I'll be here for a little bit. I might let my wife drive home. I can walk. But I'll stick around for a little bit if you'd like to have some more conversation. So let's pray to wrap this up tonight. Dear Father, God, I just thank you so much for what you are doing here at Banner Church. I know there's a lot of times as we look at this, and I know for myself, I like to see the big picture. I like to see the front of the puzzle box. But God, so often instead you choose just to hand us one piece at a time or a few pieces at a time. And you know the big picture, and we just have to trust you to lead us as we try to put them together. So, Father, as we look at the pieces that you've already brought into our lives, as we look at the growth that we're seeing, as we look at all these incredible children that are being born in our church, God, even as we just look at the financial health that you have brought to us more quickly than we anticipated, God, for that we just say thank you. We thank you for trusting us with that. So, Father, I pray that for us as the church, that we would be good stewards of the gifts that you have given us so that you might continue to bless us. So, Father, would you continue just to keep our eyes on you? May we not get distracted by all the fun, new, shiny things that are out there, but instead, may we just keep our eyes firmly fixed on you and wherever you are leading. And God, as you reveal that next step, may we just boldly obey and listen. Father, this is your church. We are here to serve you. We are here to love you, God, because you have loved us so well. So, Father, we are devoted to you. Would you just continue to give us wisdom and lead us to wherever you have in store for us. In your name, amen. Well, church, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. Thank you. I love being part of a congregation where we can have congregational meetings and I can be excited about them and still be excited after. So, church, just thank you for what you're doing. It truly is an honor to be your pastor. Go get some rest. Go watch the Lions win, and I'll see you on Sunday.